Flow Unleashed.
When the pressure rises and your instinct is to push on and force your way to stay on top, fighting for every inch. Instead, are you able to surrender into the slipstream of pressure and use the uncomfortableness to amplify your performance because of the challenge, not despite the difficulty? Welcome to Flow Unleashed. I'm Dr. Cameron Norsworthy, scientist and high-performance coach to multiple world champions. In this show, we unpack key insights on specific topics so that you are kept up to date with the latest science and practice of human performance. Lao Tzu, an ancient Chinese philosopher, famous for much of the foundational text of Taoism, tells a story. Once upon a time, a novice farmer searching for success indulged himself with ideas like the importance of effort, the hustle culture, denoting mantras such as work hard, play hard. Striving to do better, he walked onto his farm all fired up with effort, determined to make it a great success. He started pulling one of the crops as a way to make them grow faster. But this didn't work. Then he began to water the plants twice as much, hoping to make them grow faster. But he drowned them instead. And after trying to force his success, the farmer realized that no matter how much effort he put in, acting in opposition to the natural way of things was counterproductive. The same could be said for much of what we do every day. When we are up against it or striving for our own goals, often the only way we know how to get there is to push harder and try and make it happen. And sure, there are times when hard work is necessary and action is appropriate, but on many occasions it isn't. It can be important to make it happen if we are sitting lazily on a sofa, knowing there is work to do and need an injection of motivation. There are certainly times in which we need to purposefully set goals and drive our way down the path to success. But once we are in the car, once we are ready for action, embracing the task at hand, the same tools that got us in the car are not the same that are needed to perform. For individuals already motivated, already trying their best to better the situation, the barrier for most of us is that we often try too hard. As a result, we often experience that forcing things or making things happen leads to short-term, strained and dissatisfying performances. Notably, ruin in the long run. Our efforts of seemingly good intention readily seem to backfire. For example, trying not to think about a pink elephant simply doesn't work. When under pressure, making it happen has a counterproductive effect. It tightens us up and creates wooden performances, writer's block, clunky presentations, forced social interactions, and disappointing performances. Why? Because this effort stresses our neurology, making our muscles tight just when we need them to be supple. Being our best doesn't come from effortful and strained performances. It comes from letting our performance happen, allowing our training and ability to act and shine unrestrained. Sometimes we simply need to let it happen. In fact, letting it happen is so often synonymous with the act of flow that researchers such as Christian Swan from Southern Cross University, in his article Psychological States Underlying Excellent Performance in Professional Golfers, Letting It Happen versus Making It Happen, posited that the description and definition of flow could be embroiled down to one term: letting it happen. And when it's time to farm the crop, the farmer can roll up his sleeves and direct effort towards a laborious task, as an athlete may strive to train on days when motivation is low. When it comes to the farmer letting nature take its course to let the plant grow, or the athlete letting their ability shine in the heat of competition, trying too hard will only mar our potential, producing average and suboptimal performances. Society today places a lot of importance on conscious human effort, often above other forms of action. We celebrate effort, regardless of its actual effectiveness, as we aim to always be busy for the sake of being busy. Consequently, it is easy to get caught up in constantly striving, forcing outcomes, and trying to control everything around us. It is easy to find ourselves obsessing over meticulous plans, micromanaging every detail, and getting frustrated when things don't go exactly as anticipated. Whether we are chasing a performance, happiness, or love, when we try too hard, it backfires. Too much effort devoted to being happy will likely make you miserable. Too much effort in making ourselves and others fall in love will likely leave us disappointed, making us bitter. And forcing a performance will neurologically, psychologically, and physiologically limit our very ability to perform. We only need to imagine going on a romantic date. Whilst the person we're going to meet is interested in getting to know us, the person we are, we may want to impress them. And as a result, we overanalyze and rehearse what we're going to say. In doing so, we overthink, nerves disrupt our train of thought, and we overcompensate in many ways. And whilst having the best intentions, our methodology of making it happen, rather than letting the date happen, makes us sound pre-rehearsed, disingenuous, and cannibalizes our own success. One person who has a lot of experience of performing under pressure is our guest, Hazel Findlay. Hazel is 6-time junior national champion and the first British woman to climb E9 and summit El Capitan in Yosemite. Hazel literally hangs off dangerous cliffs as her day job. She is considered one of the world's best female climbers and has an intimate relationship being able to let it happen when it counts. Welcome to the show, Hazel.
Hi, Cameron. For me, letting it happen versus making it happen, it's a lot about kind of giving into the subconscious mind and not overanalyzing, over-narrating, and not trying too hard, I guess, is the thing. So there's lots of tasks that require us to let go of the conscious mind because they're too complicated. So, running down a trail, dodging rocks, we can't consciously navigate between the rocks and think, my right foot needs to be just to the left of that rock, and then my left foot's going to go here. You just have to let that happen and just do it without thought. And I think we often, when we're doing sport to a high level or anything really, we should try to remember that we can't do everything consciously. We can't make things happen all the time. Sometimes we just have to let it happen and give in to whatever feels best in that moment.
I think rock climbing is such a great analogy for all walks of life with this theme, because when you're struggling, even if it's 7 foot off the ground and you're just sort of holding on and your body starts to tire and fatigue, and you feel yourself kind of suddenly tighten, your mind, or certainly mine does, and I know for most people straight away goes to the kind of the fixed outcome of don't fall off or must make it up, or we become quite rigid in our thinking, and it's our mind becomes rigid, our muscles become rigid, we might overgrit. Often our first reaction to that kind of stress or that challenging situation is a willful, let's make it happen. And, yes, that can help short-term compliance in certain situations, but generally that's adding stress, it's adding fear, and it's tightening the very muscles that we need to be relaxed so we can be innovative and we can be smooth and find that fluency, in this case, to keep climbing up that rock or find a creative way to make a new move, or in life, that same, if we use this as an analogy, we become so narrow-minded that we don't see other options, or we don't see possible scenarios that could be in our favor. And just that phrase, letting it happen versus making it happen, seems to, for me, certainly give a sense of comfort and freedom in relaxing during that pressure situation. Because it's quite easy to sort of say, yeah, okay, let's let it happen over making it happen when you're sitting in the comfort of your armchair. But when the pressure sort of mounts and we're in that pressure cooker, trying to be or move or think from a place of letting things happen rather than making it happen is often quite counterintuitive for a lot of people, or it feels counterproductive even though it works.
How it feels when I climb is that it's the mind that wants to make it happen, and but I mean, maybe we're going to get a bit too deep here, but I guess it's that the conscious mind that kind of wants to force it to happen. Like, it kind of just wants to like hang on as tight as possible and do the kind of most obvious fast move. As the clock is counting down and your muscles are getting more and more tired, it wants to just kind of like slap towards something. And it's the subconscious, but it feels like it's coming from my body that knows intuitively that actually it needs to do something more subtle, or it needs to. My feet need to stay where they are, and my hip might need to just shift to the right, and then I can reach the next hold instead of getting my feet really high and just slapping to something. So for me, it's sometimes it's about switching off that narration in my head that says, do this, do that, that says, no, you can't do that, or you won't reach, or essentially it's the overthinking that's involved with the making it happen for me. And the letting it happen is about kind of switching off that narrative or that narration and just going with what in my body intuitively knows how to do. And that's a really learned skill. It takes a long time to practice that, but it is worth thinking about, I think. When you get down from a climb, it's worth thinking, how much was I overthinking there? How much could I have just actually given in a bit more and just let my body do what it knows how to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And for people new to this theme, might be thinking, well, doesn't making it happen, isn't that the way to go? And I kind of think of this scenario as we grow up thinking everything happens to us. It's not my fault, it happened to me. And then we kind of reach a new level of consciousness and we start to make things happen, and we become empowered, and we become a bit more directed in our behavior and our actions, and we start to make things happen, and we get a certain amount of success from that. And a lot of people will have a history or a number of previous examples where they've been able to achieve some results with this feeling and conceptual idea of making things happen. And whether that's a determined grit or a willful focus or whatever that may be, I guess what we're talking about here is moving to a higher level of consciousness where things flow through us. And I love what you were talking about, that intuitive action in terms of sidestepping that narrative that normally sets in of whatever that might be. Push harder, I must make it to the top, or whatever those words come out, depending on the context we're in. And sidestepping that narrative to get to that space where we're listening more to our, as you said, that intuitive action or intuitive response, as opposed to the thoughts that might be flashing through our consciousness. And how do you go about that? Do you sort of have any sort of go-to tips and tricks, or is it more of a kind of a conceptual, okay, I've been here before, I feel it, okay, now it's time to surrender into this moment and let things happen, or you kind of almost change your hearing and tune into a different channel, or what sort of happens for you in those moments?
It is quite a complicated idea because you do still need to try really hard. You can try hard whilst also letting it happen. And that's why people new to the idea may find this slightly contradictory, but it's trying hard in the sense that you'll use the minimum amount of force needed to stay on the rock. Trying too much would be using more than what you need. So not climbing efficiently. But in those moments of your hardest ever performance, of course you will be trying hard. You're also letting it happen as well. And you're not second guessing yourself, and you're not overthinking it, and you're not forcing it in a way that isn't efficient anymore.
You know, a lot especially in the sporting athletic world, I feel that there's a kind of a focused, directive preparation that's needed, you know, such as visualizing a line or getting the strategy right in our head or visualizing the experience coming up, being successful or being in flow, etc. But then the shift comes, I think, when we actually go to do the action. Like you said, to be more efficient, it helps to soften and let the body do what it's very well trained to do, rather than over try and overthink, which often happens when we go to apply ourselves in a let's make this happen sort of scenario.
And now a quick question for you. Do you enjoy learning about the psychology and neuroscience of human performance? Can you see yourself helping others to raise their game? Well, we have designed the ultimate course to train our coaches so that they can amplify the performance of other elite professionals. And now, we are opening it up for you too. If you want to take your knowledge and practice to the next level and become a coach, then join us on this year's ICF-approved Flow Coach accreditation. If you want to find out whether it's the right fit for you, simply go to flowcenter.org.
I think one element worth talking about is this tendency for us to want to control things too much, for us to want to be in control and also for things to be perfect. And I see that so much with climbers where they, as soon as their body gets slightly thrown off balance, instead of just letting their body correct itself naturally, you see people overly controlling the situation, or even sometimes just letting go because they're like, oh, well, there's no point now because my body was thrown out. It's not perfect anymore. I'm doing it wrong. And they just let go. I think it's a real tendency for us to want things to be in our control and want things to be perfect. And you find that a lot of climbers, there's two types of styles of climbing, I guess, is red pointing and on-sighting. Red pointing is when you kind of rehearse the route over many days, many tries, and then you finally do it. And then on-sighting is just trying a route first try. And these kind of perfectionist people find it very hard to on-sight a route. They're very good at rehearsing routes, getting the moves completely wired, and then doing it. But they'll do it very slowly because they can only do it once everything's perfect. And these people find it really difficult to let go. You know, they analyze everything to death and then they can execute. But it's in those moments where we feel really uncomfortable, where our bodies feel slightly out of sync. And it's what you do in that moment. Do you let your body just try and correct itself, or do you force through? And like you said, you know, just grit your teeth and pull a horrible face and just power through? Or do you have that bit of extra patience to just let whatever needs to happen? So I move on to a few tips.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I used to have this mantra, let the body climb. I think when I first started learning about this stuff, and I realized that sometimes I could be like that myself, a little bit too controlling. I'm not a perfectionist, but like most people, I want things to be in control. But I'm an overthinker. So I realized when I started to do this training that actually the thing that kind of got in my way and limited my performance frequently was this overthinking, was this too much input from the conscious mind saying, oh, you know, it's not right. What you're doing is wrong. You're wrong-handed. You got this hold wrong. You've messed up. You know, this kind of commentary in my head, which was not helping me climb well at all. And for me to actively learn how to let the body climb better, to let it happen and not force it, I would say to myself, let the body climb. And it's just a little mantra. It's maybe not even to say it properly in your head, just to have the concept of it pop up. and maybe do some kind of breathing exercise to return to the senses in the body instead of being engaged too much with all of the narrative that was going on in the kind of the conscious mind. And that was sometimes enough for me to just click into a more intuitive way of climbing. And in some ways, it's quite related to fear of failure as well. I think it's the brain really resisting the potentiality of failing, because it feels riskier to just let something happen than to force it. Once you kind of give in and take things out of your hands slightly, that feels riskier, but it's seemingly contradictory. It's that you actually end up climbing better if you do that. It's one of those weird paradoxes. But yeah, I think, working on fear of failure might help you let it happen more than make it happen. Sometimes that's really the underlying thing that's going on. Maybe saying a mantra such as let the body climb, and also bringing your attention to your senses. Because if the reason you're not letting your body climb is because you're too swept away with these conscious thoughts, bringing your attention to your sensory data in your body, whether it's the feel of the rock under your fingers or the feeling of your breath or whatever's your preferred method, connecting back to the senses helps distance yourself from those thoughts, which are massively distracting.
Yeah, it's so much good stuff from there. We have like a hashtag letting it flow, or, which is quite generic, but I think just saying those words, let it happen, let it flow, let the body climb, that let tells the body to relax into it rather than fight it. A lot of, you brought up the fear of failure, and I think, that's super key here. And I think it's any fear, whether it's fear of competence or fear of a threat to our competence or a threat to our comfort, we start to, how do we respond in those situations? For most of us, certainly myself and many others that I know, we've been taught from generational parenting and education and cultural messaging that when the going gets tough, we push harder, and peak performance comes at the detriment of our internal experience, and no pain, no gain, all those kind of classic messages you see on t-shirts that are pumped into us, that often it's the natural way to deal with fear and subsequent stress is to tighten and to push through. And for some people, this might be a completely new concept altogether. For some people, you might be doing it readily already. But regardless of whether it's kind of inbuilt or a new paradigm for us, being able to insert a new script or insert a new functional pattern or insert a new way of thinking and behaving is really important than just going, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to make it happen. I'm not going to force, or I'm not going to fight it. We've got to fill it with something that leads us in the direction of where we want to go. And so the two things that I really got from what you were saying was this, let the body climb, and allowing our experience to go towards our senses. So within our consciousness, where it's being consumed by our kind of sensory input, what our senses are feeling and seeing, smelling and touching. And then there's almost no room for those normal thought processes or the 10, 20 years of conditioning that may be holding us back. So when you go to your senses, what do you feel the rock on yourself, or do you go to your chalk bag, or do you sort of breathe and feel the air coming in your lungs, or how do you invite those senses to take over the experience for you?
Yeah, so for me, it kind of depends on how much time I've got. So say I'm on a rest on a route and I can hang there for a long time. I will have more time, so I'll spend more time connecting to my senses, especially because on rests, that's often when you switch out of flow and all of those distracting thoughts come in your head. I might, focus on my breathing. It might even be useful for me to try and lower my heart rate, or at least watch my heart rate lower as I get ready to move on again. I might feel a rock underneath my fingers. And then one actually that I think is really powerful is to just look at a small piece of rock, like the size of a penny, and just zoom in to that small piece of rock and just look at the different colors and the patterns on that small piece of rock. I think it's a slightly weird one, because I guess if you've ever done any mindfulness or meditation or anything like that, it's very rare that you use vision, because it's so vast and bright and complicated. But for some reason, it worked really well for me to just look at one spot. I think because when we're a bit distracted and stressed, we tend to dot our eyes everywhere. Our eyes don't know where to look, and everything you see kind of conjures more thought. Whereas if you look at one spot intensely and you really absorb whatever information you receive from looking at that one spot, it really calms the mind and kind of turns the volume up on that sensory data of vision. And then if I don't have that much time, I might, say I'm mid-move and I'm like, all of a sudden discover I'm a bit distracted and I'm forcing things and I need to let things happen a little bit more. I might just for a split second zoom in on the piece of rock that's as big as a penny. Not even for a second, because there's no time for it. One thing I commonly do is I'll breathe out like, but it's not the breath I'm necessarily connecting to, but the sound of the breath. So it's that sound as it comes into my consciousness that kind of goes, right, now it's time to focus. Now it's time to just let the body do what it needs to do, and yet also be 100% focused on the task at hand right now. It's interesting because I've seen other climbers who've had no mental training at all, but kind of successful climbers, do something similar where before a hard sequence, they'll do a breath out like that. And it's just intuitively part of what they do. And then when you question them about it, they're like, I don't do that. But yeah, that seems to work well for me.
Do you find it easy to take this approach in other areas of your life other than climbing? Or is it almost like a different person in how you do your other activities in life, whether that's editing footage or writing emails or dancing in a nightclub or whatever it is? Do you, when you reach a kind of challenging situation, do you use these skills in other areas of your life? And does that come naturally? And do you have any specific examples that have come up recently?
I started a new sport a few years ago, paragliding. I definitely noticed myself forcing it a lot in paragliding. Coming into land and my brain is going mental. Like, how high am I above the ground? Where's the wind coming from? Just trying to take in so many bits of information and just trying to work out exactly where I should be as I come into land. And then my boyfriend, who was much better at letting things happen, he doesn't think about it at all. He just circles the landing field and then just lands. It's quite an eye-opener observing that in myself and really trying to let it happen. And like you said earlier, it's one thing saying that now whilst I'm sat on the sofa, but it's another thing when I'm in the air and I'm getting all these flashes of landing in a tree or landing in the lake and telling myself to let it happen. It's really difficult.
I find whether it's a tax return or a public speaking or things that ignite a little bit of fear and stress inside me, I start to immediately, the brain goes bing, and then I kind of try to control and force something to hopefully feel better and perform better, with good intentions, but it doesn't always end up that way. An important point that I wanted to raise, so there's no confusion here, is that when we talk about letting it happen, it's not akin to just being laissez-faire and letting anything happen. And just, often people use the term, I'll just go with the flow. And it's kind of meaning that you're allowing outside influences to take control of your life. And that's not necessarily what, is meant here, in terms of we're still very much holding volition and in charge of our experience. And the antithesis of just going with other people's flow, where we're listening internally to our intuition as opposed to the the monkey mind or the inner critic or the chatterbox or that kind of forced will that comes up when we think it needs to.
I think we have a problem letting it happen when we care too much about whatever it is that we're doing. So with me, with climbing, when I'm on a route, I care too much about staying on. I care too much about getting to the top. I care too much about performance. And that's why I'm not able to let it happen so easily. Same with paragliding. I care too much about not hurting myself. Maybe not too much is maybe the wrong way to say it, but I care a lot about not hurting myself. Whereas if you take that danger away, or you take that desire to perform well away, we generally don't have a problem letting it happen. But we might have a problem with not trying hard enough. We might just give up. And so, with something like a tax return, I never have a problem with letting it happen. Although I guess you might do if you're really scared of making a mistake with your tax return. But with my coaching business, for example, I don't necessarily suffer from the letting it happen, because although I care about it, I could probably care about it more. And so for me, it's that isn't a problem for me when it comes to my coaching business, of the letting it happen. What's the problem is with the discipline. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you brought up some good parallels there. And, one is, for example, in a more productive business setting, someone might come up with the argument, let's say I need more sales. I've got to make it happen to get more sales through the door. Or I run a coaching business and I got to make it happen to get more clients. And I think it's important to distinguish between being very proactive and sticking to the process and doing what needs to be done, versus, as you put it, over caring or over gripping and sort of forcing that scenario to occur. And often this parallel happens a lot in relationships, I think, as well. Certainly for myself, if I'm not sure if over caring is the right word for me, but the kind of, when we have our kind of self-interest goals at heart, whether that's protecting another person or wanting someone else to feel better, we get into that control mode. Our egoic self starts to control the operation, which causes that I'm going to make this happen. And then for me, that's when the problems start setting in, and I start shooting myself in the foot by over providing and disempowering my partner, or vice versa. I start to control the event and miss opportunities and miss the connection or the real meaning of the communication, and my brain gets stuck in the detail. I heard you sort of spark up when I said relationships. Do you have a similar?
Well, I was thinking more about dating. You were saying when we care too much, and it's one of those things where if you're single, you could be proactive about finding someone without being desperate, if you know what I mean, without forcing it. So, you can just go out to social events and just make an effort to meet more people, ask for people's numbers of people who you like. But then there's the desperation where it's like every part of your life is about finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and every conversation you have has got that as the motive. And that's when you never find someone. The analogy of the buses, they all come at once. And it's just trying too hard never seems to pay off.
Well, I'm glad we were able to get some dating advice from Hazel Findlay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Don't try too hard.
Yeah. Any sort of last thoughts or one takeaway that you thought was interesting?
Yeah, I really liked the kind of the distinction between letting it happen doesn't mean being not bothered, I suppose. I think that is a point of confusion in it, but it's a very interesting point. And so I'm going to think about that a little bit more, I think. And just making sure that, there's intention and that there's care and discipline, but that doesn't mean forcing it as well.
We're going to start to come to the end of this podcast now because we're running out of time. There have been some really kind of interesting touch points from what happens in the body under stress and perfectionism and focusing on outcomes and trying too hard and surrendering rather than fighting and using little mantras or our senses to kind of override what might be happening in our brain and allowing ourselves to sidestep our normal conditioning in order to find that intuitive action that is inherent within us, which when I look at other talkers talk, they often talk about authentic action or different names for it. But thank you very much for your time today, Hazel. I've really enjoyed the chat. It's got me thinking, and certainly I've got a practice talk this afternoon for a TED Talk, and I'm going to certainly focus on letting it happen, letting the words come out of my mouth rather than making it happen, and see what comes of it. What's your biggest dream at the moment?
I'm going to Yosemite in November, and for me, there's no other place as inspiring as climbing on El Capitan. So that's kind of where my dreams are right now. But as you know, Cam, I'm not the best at setting big goals. I really enjoyed the chat. I thought it was super interesting, and I'll do the same with whatever's coming up in my life.
Great point. Well, thank you very much. Very grateful to have your time. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Flow Unleashed.
There is always going to be something in our lives over which we have no control. There will always be times in which we feel out of control. And there will be situations every day in which we over-control. Trying to control what is beyond us only leads to frustration, stress, and a host of negative emotions. Instead, we can embody an attitude of letting things happen. We can come back to our composed self and meet the moment with grace. It is about cultivating a mindset of flexibility, spontaneity, and receptiveness, like water running down a stream. Rather than aggressively pushing against circumstance, we can apply minimal effort to navigate the situation and perform moment to moment. We aim to work in harmony with, not in opposition to what we face. We aim to work in collaboration with, rather than in competition with, our opponents and the task at hand. Importantly, letting it happen doesn't necessarily make us passive, lazy, or ignorant. This would be passivity and disengagement, not effortless engagement. Letting it happen doesn't mean we will be aimless, without purpose or direction. Rather, it seeks to find an internal harmony with our environment and surroundings and personal engagement. It is not to be confused with just being relaxed. By cultivating a mindset of letting it happen, we conserve more energy and create space in our psyche. We allow greater synchronicity as opposed to sponsoring further friction and conflict. And in doing so, we discover the paradoxical wisdom of accomplishing more by doing less. To let it happen embodies the teachings of Wu Wei and the advice of Kung Fu master Bruce Lee when he said, "Be water, my friend." We allow ourselves to meet the task ready, alert, willing, yet keep ourselves agile enough to flow past obstacles and fall into opportunities that present themselves. Sometimes it takes real strength and confidence to simply be in the experience and not try to over-control it, especially when under pressure and wanting to engineer an outcome. We may feel the need to be in charge of every aspect of our lives, especially at junctures when we feel scared or threatened, like when facing change or an important event. But by practicing the art of letting it happen, we accept that change is constant. We also accept that control is an illusion. It forces us to slow down and sync up, observe what is happening and engage with the opportunity of each passing moment. I hope that the idea and practice of letting it happen positively filters into your life, starting today. If you would like to find out more about Hazel Findlay, please see the show notes. Thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed. If you enjoyed listening, please subscribe to get notified when our next episode drops. The more people that subscribe, the better I can make the show for you. Equally, please leave a review. Your review will go a long way to helping others find this pod. Until the next time, thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed.